Chapter 7 Sanditon by Jane Austen. The popularity of the Parkers brought them some visitors the very next morning, amongst them Sir Edward Denham and his sister, who have been seen at Sanditon House, drove on to pay their compliments. And the duty of letter writing being accomplished, Charlotte was settled with Mrs. Parker in the drawing-room in time to see them all. The Denhams were the only ones to excite particular attention. Charlotte was glad to complete her knowledge of the family by an introduction to them, and found them, the better half at least, for while single, the gentleman may sometimes be thought the better half of the pair, not unworthy notice. Miss Denham was a fine young woman, but cold and reserved, giving the idea of one who felt her consequence with pride and her poverty with discontent, and who was immediately gnawed by the want of a handsomer equipage than the simple gig in which they travelled, and which their groom was leading about still in her sight. Sir Edward was much her superior in air and manner, certainly handsome, but yet more to be remarked for his very good address and wish of paying attention and giving pleasure. He came into the room remarkably well, talked much and very much to Charlotte, by whom he chanced to be placed, and she soon perceived that he had a fine countenance, a most pleasing gentleness of voice, and a great deal of conversation. She liked him. Sober-minded as she was, she thought him agreeable, and did not quarrel with the suspicion of his finding her equally so, which would arise from his evidently disregarding his sister's motion to go, and persisting in his station and his discourse. I make no apologies for my heroine's vanity. If there are young ladies in the world at her time of life more dull of fancy and more careless of pleasing, I know them not, and I would never wish to know them. At last, from the low French windows of the drawing-room, which commanded the road and all the paths across the down, Charlotte and Sir Edward, as they sat, could not but observe Lady Denham and Miss Brereton walking by, and there was instantly a slight change in Sir Edward's countenance, with an anxious glance after them as they proceeded, followed by an early proposal to his sister, not merely for moving, but for walking on together to the terrace, which altogether gave a hasty turn to Charlotte's fancy, cured her of her half-hour's fever, and placed her in a more capable state of judging, when Sir Edward was gone, of how agreeable he had actually been. Perhaps there was a good deal in his air and address, and his title did him no harm, thought she. She was very soon in his company again. The first object of the Parkers, when their house was cleared of morning visitors, was to get out themselves. The terrace was the attraction to all. Everybody who walked must begin with the terrace, and there, seated on one of the two green benches by the gravel walk, they found the united Denham party. But though united in the gross, very distinctly divided again. The two superior ladies being at one end of the bench, and Sir Edward and Miss Brereton at the other. Charlotte's first glance told her that Sir Edward's air was that of a lover. There could be no doubt of his devotion to Clara. How Clara received it was less obvious, but she was inclined to think not very favourably, for though sitting thus apart with him, which probably she might not have been able to prevent, her air was calm and grave. That the young lady at the other end of the bench was doing penance was indubitable. The difference in Miss Denham's countenance, the change from Miss Denham sitting in cold grandeur in Mrs. Parker's drawing-room, to be kept from silence by the efforts of others, to Miss Denham at Lady Denham's elbow, listening and talking with smiling attention, or solicitous eagerness was very striking and very amusing, or very melancholy, just as satire or morality might prevail. Miss Denham's character was pretty well decided with Charlotte. Sir Edward's required longer observation. He surprised her by quitting Clara immediately on their all joining and agreeing to walk, and by addressing his attentions entirely to herself. Stationing himself close by her, he seemed to mean to detach her as much as possible from the rest of the party, and to give her the whole of his conversation. He began, in a tone of great taste and feeling, to talk of the sea and the seashore, and ran with energy through all the usual phrases employed in praise of their sublimity, and descriptive of the undescribable emotions they excite in the mind of sensibility. The terrific grandeur of the ocean in a storm, its glassy surface in a calm, its gulls and its samphire, and the deep fathoms of its abysses, its quick vicissitudes, its direful deceptions, its mariners tempting it in sunshine and overwhelmed by the sudden tempest, all were eagerly and fluently touched. Rather commonplace, perhaps, but doing very well from the lips of a handsome Sir Edward. And she could not but think him a man of feeling, till he began to stagger her with the number of his quotations and the bewilderment of some of his sentences. "Do you remember," he said, "Scott's beautiful lines on the sea? Oh, what a descriptive they convey! They are never out of my thoughts when I walk here. That man who can read them unmoved must have the nerves of an assassin. Heaven defend me from meeting such a man unarmed." "What description do you mean?" said Charlotte. "I remember none at this moment of the sea in either of Scott's poems." "Do you not indeed? Nor can I exactly recall the beginning of this moment, but you cannot have forgotten his description of women. Oh, women in our hours of ease. Delicious, delicious. Had he written nothing more, he would have been immortal, immortal. And then again, that unequalled, unrivalled address to parental affection. Some feelings are to mortals given, with less of earth in them than heaven, etc. But while we are on the subject of poetry, what think you, Miss Hayward, of Burns' lines to Miss Mary? Oh, there is pathos in To Madden One. If ever there was a man who felt, it was Burns. Montgomery was all the fire of poetry. Wordsworth has the true soul of it. Campbell, in his Pleasures of Hope, has touched the extreme of our sensation. Like angels' visits few and far between. Can you conceive anything more subduing, more melting, more fraught with the deep sublime than that line? But Burns, I confess my sense of his preeminence, Miss Hayward. If Scott has a fault, it is the want of passion, tender, elegant, descriptive, but tame. The man who cannot do justice to the attributes of woman is my contempt. Sometimes, indeed, a flash of feeling seems to irradiate him, as in the lines we were speaking of, "Oh, woman, in our hours of ease." But Burns is always on fire. His soul was the altar in which lovely women sat enshrined. His spirit truly breathed the immortal incense which is her due. "I have read several of Burns' poems with great delight," said Charlotte as soon as she had time to speak. "But I am not poetic enough to separate a man's poem entirely from his character, and poor Burns's known irregularities greatly interrupt my enjoyment of his lines. I have difficulty in depending on the truth of his feelings as a lover. I have not faith in the sincerity of the affections of a man of his description. He felt and he wrote and he forgot." "Oh, no, no," exclaimed Sir Edward in his ecstasy. "He was all ardour and truth. His genius and his susceptibilities might lead him into some aberrations, but who is perfect? It was hypercriticism, it was pseudo-philosophy to expect from the soul of high-toned genius the grovellings of the common mind. the coruscations of talent elicited by impassioned feeling in the breast of man are perhaps incompatible with some of the prosaic decencies of life, nor can you, lovely as Miss Hayward, speaking with an air of deep sentiment, nor can any woman be a fair judge of what a man may be propelled to say, write, or do by the sovereign impulses of illimitable ardour. This was very fine, but if Charlotte understood it at all, not very moral, and being moreover by no means pleased with his extraordinary style of compliment, she gravely answered, I really know nothing of the matter. This is a charming day. The wind, I fancy, must be southerly. Happy, happy wind to engage Miss Hayward's thoughts. She began to think him downright silly. His choosing to walk with her she had learnt to understand. It was done to pique Miss Brereton. She had read it in an anxious glance or two on his side. But why he should talk so much nonsense, unless he could do no better, was unintelligible. He seemed very sentimental, very full of some feelings or other, and very much addicted to all the newest fashion hard words. Had not a very clear brain, she presumed, and talked a great deal by rote. The future might explain him further, for when there was a proposition of going into the library, she felt that she had quite enough of Sir Edward for one morning, and very gladly accepted Lady Denham's invitation of remaining on the terrace with her. The others all left them. Sir Edward with looks of very gallant despair in tearing himself away, and they united their agreeableness, that is, Lady Denham, like a true great lady, talked and talked only of her own concerns, and Charlotte listened, amused in considering the contrast between her two companions. Certainly there was no strain of doubtful sentiment, nor any phrase of difficult interpretation in Lady Denham's discourse. Taking hold of Charlotte's arm with the ease of one who felt that any notice from her was an honour, and communicative from the influence of the same conscious importance of a natural love of talking, she immediately said in a tone of great satisfaction, and with a look of arch sagacity, Miss Esther wants me to invite her and her brother to spend a week with me at Sanditon House, and I did last summer, but I shan't. She has been trying to get round me every way with her praise of this and her praise of that. But I saw what she was about. I saw through it all. I am not very easily taken in, my dear. Charlotte could think of nothing more harmless to be said than the simple inquiry of Sir Edward and Miss Denham. I'm going to stop chapter 7 here and continue in the next video.